Our readings from Peter and the Psalm and also from the Gospel all tie together in various ways. But I want to look particularly at what Peter is saying and about keeping a clean tongue in your mouth. Peter writes, "So put away all malice, all guile, and insincerity, and envy, and all slander. Like newborn babes, Jesus wants you to be pure and clean as the driven snow." Why? Because you are now part of Christ's body. It is God to whom you report, not to the world, not to men. But it is so hard when people are unkind, when they gossip, when they lie, when they slander you. As the psalmist said, the wicked prowl on every side. That's as much true for David as it was 2,500 years ago as it is today. We are surrounded by a wicked world and with wicked people. Sometimes they're members of our family, they're co-workers, they're neighbors, but they use their tongues to slander and destroy. Some people take great pleasure in saying evil things. They're like sharks. They sense blood in the water, and they're going to swim round and round and round and stir up as much trouble as they can, and they do so by lying. Friends, lying is a tool of the enemy. It's a tool of the devil. Satan is the slanderer. And men and women who are not of God more often than not resort to lies to get ahead in this world. They say and do evil things, sometimes for purposes, sometimes because they just enjoy being difficult. What do you do as a Christian? How do you respond? Well, Peter in his letter says, you don't do what they do. You don't. You put away all malice, all guile, and insincerity, and envy, and all slander. Your hearts have to be pure, because God has given you eternal life. And why do you want to mess around in the gutter in Satan's world by fighting with Satan's tools? Jesus calls us to personal holiness. He calls us to be a royal priesthood, a chosen people called out from the world, not to use the tools of the world, but to be spotless and blameless like Him. It's hard. I know when people say and do unkind things to me, about me, it's hurtful. When they say things about my wife or my children or my friends, I get angry. And, I think of the movie The Untouchables, the one with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery, and there's a little scene where Sean Connery says, "This is Chicago. If you bring a knife to a fight, if the other guy brings a knife to a fight, make sure you bring a gun." That's the American way, it seems. We've got to top it. We've got to fight back. If we get hit, we hit back harder. But Jesus says, don't play those games. Step out from that world. You don't need it, because you have everything in Jesus Christ. Now, that doesn't mean that God is going to protect you from the evil one, the slanderers, the gossipers. In fact, He tells His disciples, you will be made the subject of ridicule. You will be made the subject of gossip. But bear it for my sake. Don't hit back. Love back. What does that mean, love back? Does it mean to put doormats? We're airy-fairy people that aren't serious? No. It means we're to look at the people who are evil and act badly towards us through the eyes of God and ask ourselves, why are they behaving this way? What brokenness, what hurt, what insincerity is at work? Years ago when I was in Sebastian, I was brand new, and Susan and I were quite excited. We had Martin Yaboho, who was a bishop of Matana in Burundi. Burundi is a little country in the center of Africa. And Martin's now the Archbishop of Burundi. He's gone up in the world. And he came to stay with us because I had met him and I had invited him to visit our parish. And he stayed for a weekend. And it is rather fun. I still get a chuckle out of it because he asked Susan to iron his vestments before the start of the service at 7 in the morning. And it's the only time Susan, in 35 years of marriage, has ironed anything before 7 in the morning. Well, Martin, he's a French speaker. That's his first language, and English is his third or fourth language. But he's enthusiastic, and he's exciting, and he gave a really great sermon. And I was so proud of myself and pleased with myself because here I'm a brand new priest, and here we're a little town in Florida, and I've been able to bring over a bishop from Africa who is just able to share all these wonderful insights. And I'm standing in the checkout line. That's what I call it at the end of the service, at the back of the church as people file out. I shake their hands as they leave. And the junior warden came up, and I'd only been there a few months, so I didn't really know people that well. And this was an older man. He was in his 80s at the time, and he was originally from South Georgia and had moved to Florida all those years ago. And he said, you know, George, that was really interesting, but you know, I don't want to see a colored man in our pulpit again. And I'm like, oh, I just got kicked in the stomach. How could a man in the 20th century, in 2000, say such a thing in public in front of other people? I don't want a colored man in the pulpit. Now, I failed that man. Why did I fail him? Because I responded with the tools of the world. I smiled, pretended not to hear him, and took him as I was shaking his hand and sort of pulled him past me so he was out of the way. How would the eyes of God look at that situation? This man sinned. He did something really, really unconscionable. But why was he doing this? I never asked. What I did was I closed my heart to this man. I was saying, I can't wait to get rid of this guy. I can't wait to find a way to sort of move him aside. And is that how Jesus would act? Or would Jesus essentially say, why are you saying something that you know is socially unacceptable, that is hurtful and painful to people? What is in your heart that is causing you to do these things? I failed in that situation. And sometimes I've failed often because I stop and I react with the words of the world, with the ways of the world. But Christ calls us to respond with love. It doesn't mean tolerating bigotry. It doesn't mean tolerating racism. Far from it. We must drive it from our midst. We must defeat it. But that doesn't mean driving from our midst the people who are trapped in those sins. We must love them and find a way to free them from whatever is on their heart. So when somebody uses swear words at you, uses racial epithets at you, uses language that is hurtful, go back to the schoolyard and think of all the taunts the bullies would shout. Fatty, or ginger, or shorty, or this and that and the other. The things that were desired only to hurt. Don't respond in kind. Respond with love. Now I realize I'm asking a great deal of you, but this is what Christ asks us. He tells us we're a royal priesthood, and people who were no people until we became His people. And once we became His people, we must respond and treat our enemies with love. Love our enemies, love our neighbor, treat them with compassion and dignity. Again, that does not mean that we're doormats, that we accept abuse willingly, but rather, don't respond with abuse with abuse. Allow God's love to be there. Why? because he abides in us and we abide in him. And in him there is no darkness at all. Don't bring the darkness into that love of God. Amen.